Juneteenth goes by many names, whether you call it Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, or the country's second Independence Day. Juneteenth is one of the most important anniversaries in American history. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger, who had fought for the Union, led a force of soldiers to Galveston, Texas, to deliver a very important message. The war was finally over. The Union had won, and it now had the manpower to enforce the end of slavery. The announcement came 2 months after the effective conclusion of the Civil War, and even longer since President Abraham Lincoln had first signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That was 160 years ago. But there is much more to the story of Juneteenth that you probably didn't know. First off, what does Juneteenth represent? First things first, Juneteenth gets its name from combining June and 19th, the day that Granger arrived in Galveston, bearing a message of freedom for the slaves there. Upon his arrival, he read out General Order No. 3, informing the residents that slavery would no longer be tolerated and that all slaves were now free and would henceforth be treated as hired workers if they chose to remain on the plantations. The order read, in part, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired laborer. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere." But slavery did not end on Juneteenth. Enslaved people had already been emancipated, they just didn't know it. The June 19th announcement came more than 2.5 years after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1st, 1863. So technically, from the Union's perspective, the 250,000 enslaved people in Texas were already free, but none of them were aware of it, and no one was in a rush to inform them. There were many theories as to why the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't enforced in Texas. News traveled slowly back in those days. It took Confederate soldiers in western Texas more than 2 months to hear that Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. Still, some have struggled to explain the 30-month gap between Lincoln's proclamation and the enslaved people's freedom, leading to speculation that some Texans suppressed the announcement. Other theories include that the original messenger was murdered to prevent the information from being relayed, or that the federal government purposely delayed the announcement to Texas to get one more cotton harvest out of the enslaved workers. But the real reason is probably that Lincoln's proclamation simply wasn't enforceable in the rebel states before the end of the Civil War. What came after the period of Juneteenth is known as the Scatter. Most freed people weren't terribly interested in staying with the people who had enslaved them, even if pay was involved. In fact, some were leaving before Granger had finished making the announcement. It's perhaps unsurprising that many former slaves did not stay on the plantations as workers and instead left in search of new beginnings or to find family members who had been sold away. Not all enslaved people were freed instantly. Texas is a large state, and General Granger's order was slow to spread. According to historian James Smallwood, many enslavers deliberately suppressed the information until after the harvest, and some beyond that. In July 1867, there were 2 separate reports of enslaved people being freed, and one report of a Texas horse thief named Alex Simpson, whose enslaved people were only freed after his hanging in 1868. Despite the announcement, Texas enslavers weren't too eager to part with what they had felt was their property. When freed people tried to leave, many of them were beaten, lynched, or murdered. A former enslaved person named Susan Merritt recalled, "They would catch freed slaves swimming across the Sabine River and shoot them." There were limited options for celebrating. When freed people tried to celebrate the first anniversary of the announcement a year later, they faced a problem. Segregation laws were expanding rapidly, so there were no public places or parks they were permitted to use. In the 1870s, former enslaved people pooled together $800 and purchased 10 acres of land, which they deemed as the Emancipation Park. Until the 1950s, it was the only public park and swimming pool in the Houston area that was open to African Americans. The Emancipation Park underwent a $33.5 million renovation in 2016 and was rededicated in the summer of 2017. The renovation helped the architecture tell the story of Juneteenth, the story of oppression, struggle, freedom, and hope. Juneteenth celebrations waned during the era of Jim Crow laws until the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, when the Poor People's March planned by Martin Luther King Jr. was purposely scheduled to coincide with the date. The march brought Juneteenth back to the forefront. And when march participants took the celebrations back to their home states, the holiday was reborn. Texas was the first state to declare Juneteenth a state holiday in 1980, becoming the first state to do so. And now, Juneteenth is a federal holiday. Thanks to the efforts of the nonagenarian activist Opal Lee, who began walking state to state to draw attention to the cause in 2016, Congress passed legislation making Juneteenth a federal holiday in 2021. President Joe Biden signed the bill into law on June 17, 2021. So, what about the flag? The Juneteenth flag is full of symbolism. The first Juneteenth flag was designed by L.J. Graff in 1997, and she packed lots of meaning into her design. The colors red, white, and blue echo the American flag to symbolize that the enslaved people and their descendants were Americans. The star in the middle pays homage to Texas, while the bursting new star on the horizon of the red and blue fields represent a new freedom and a new people. The second flag was created by activist Ben Haith in 2000 and illustrated by Graff. It is a revision of the first. The arc in the middle represents a new day. If you liked our video, don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for more videos like this one.
Alone.
The peace commissioners appear today, or
state by
worse,
state,
on
you
the
can
morning.
extricate.
I can't